Anyone who watches my content semi-regularly will know that I'm a bit of a John Candy fan.
That's the understatement of the year.
So imagine how thrilling it was for me to get to sit down with his son Chris to talk not only about his father's legacy and career, but also the new documentary which he is a producer of that's coming to Amazon Prime next month. So please join me as I take my hats off to Chris Candy.
A lot of people hate this hat. It angers a lot of people, just the sight of it.
Chris, thanks so much for being here with me today.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me.
It was kind of really rewarding for me to know that you're familiar with my work.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you for everything you've done. I think that you are someone who's always come across my radar, who loves cinema and film, and I think we also just share in the fact that we both love a certain era of comedy. I mean, I just recently saw your Cabin Boy video, and I was just like, oh man, this guy fully gets it, and I'm excited to talk to you about comedy because I think we have a lot of the same opinions. But just to say off the bat, thank you so much for all the years you've dedicated to my dad's work, because I've loved listening to some of your observations, and I've even shared some of them with people, and it's really astute, and it's awesome.
Oh, well, that's so rewarding and delightful for me to hear, because John Candy is a very big part of the work I do here on the channel, but it also kind of opened the door to connecting with so many subscribers and fans and my audience members who are also fans of your dad and his work. And I sometimes take that for granted, that there's this really passionate John Candy fan base out there. And I got to experience it for myself firsthand because you're touring with the documentary currently, and you made a stop in Philadelphia. And
yeah,
incredible. I think most people think that a documentary, you're going to see it live in an event like that. It doesn't really lend itself to a big premiere atmosphere. But I got to tell you, this documentary played so well to a crowd.
Yeah, I was really impressed with how it played as well. I've had the opportunity to make projects and short films and whatnot, and I've always known from my personal standpoint that when you do put anything up on its feet in an audience, it has a completely different presentation and feel than it would if you're just screening something online or across the television. That shared experience of being in the cinema is just so awesome. And I've been watching John Candy, I Like Me kind of take shape over the last half a year. And it has moved me every time I watch it from a personal level, to then get to share that with people in a theater and see where people laugh and see where people get a little sniffly and tear up, was really gratifying, just as being a producer on the project. But just as a filmmaker and someone who has worked in that, it was a very gratifying feeling.
Well, and I should point out that you have a few more tour dates left. You have
Yes.
October 2nd, it's going to be in Los Angeles, and then October 5th, you're in Chicago. The Toronto one is sold out on the 6th, but then there's the 8th, you're back in the US, in Brooklyn, and then finally October 14th in Boston. And I really, if you are remotely a fan of John Candy and have any interest in documentary, you have to go see this with the crowd. I know it's out on Amazon on the 10th, but I would still recommend, if you're remotely near those areas, go see it, because, man, that night just becomes such a celebration of your dad's work. It's, as I was saying, it's there's not really a John Candy concert that we go to annually where we see each other. And when I got to the theater and saw a few people outside with John Candy t-shirts, I was like, oh, I just, you don't really get a chance to be in that world. And so it was so great to be a part of that and to see the work that you're doing with this doc. And there was, now you have merchandise. I was able to pick up This Hat Angers People t-shirts. You're back. You have the domain, johncandy.com, social media accounts. You're really kind of building this, it seems like a brand about preserving your dad's legacy, which is just awesome.
Yeah, thank you. That's all via the help of Maximum Effort and Ryan Reynolds' company. They do that work really well, and it was helpful in getting my dad's career together, all kind of in one place. And yeah, we've never done merchandise. We've never done those types of endeavors, and it's difficult when you're parent's a celebrity like his, like you really want to remember them for the parent they were. But then when you're going into the elements of sharing him with the world and his fan base, it's moments like these where he said, let's just go ahead and do all of it. And so that's when the shirt ideas came in, and the hat ideas. And then the gentleman who was doing johncandy.com, I have to give him a special shout out. He did an incredible job just out of a labor of love for all these years.
I used that site for my research a lot. He had great photos and stuff on there.
And his, just so everyone knows, his website will eventually be archived on johncandy.com. Whatever johncandy.com ends up becoming, his site will be archived so you could see the work that he did.
It really also, it shows you kind of the way that the internet has progressed, that maybe, like, I forget when that site went up, 20 years ago maybe, that like someone could buy johncandy.com without a problem and build that website. So it's amazing to see just kind of how your dad's work has continued to grow and connect. And I think the one thing we on the other side of this take for granted is what it's like for you to experience these movies, because not only, you know, is your dad in them, but it's like your dad's closest friends were the biggest comedy stars of that generation, who I'm sure were like family to you. So are you able to watch not only your dad's movies, but movies from Martin Short and Eugene Levy? Can you be objective at all as you're watching those things, or is it kind of hard for you to fully disassociate?
I think I have very big, rose-colored glasses on when I watch all of those movies. I think that I maybe you can relate to this, but those era of film and those types of comedies, they, present a feeling inside of me of a time in my life when I was alive and I was younger. But I can objectively tell like which ones maybe don't hold up as well. I'm not that tone deaf, but with that being said, I really love that era of comedy and I love that era of filmmaking. And I think it was actually a very, creative time. It was kind of towards the end of a big 80s era of comedy. And I think it was this transitional period before we get, I really think that my dad passed away in a time when comedy was just about to shift. And I think you can look, and I'm not quite sure at the types of movies, but I remember when I was a kid and after he passed away, going to see comedies, they were kind of in this no man's land of, as you were talking about with Cabin Boy, and there was this thing happening with comedy where the old formula wasn't necessarily working as well. And I think once you get to Waiting for Guffman and then American Pie, I think you see this new reinvention into comedy and the directions that it went. And so, like, and I could be wrong, but that's just a blank observation I had on that of like, oh, it shifted. It went away from your 80s and 90s comedy, and it progressed into that.
I always say that generation had like an identity crisis, those performers in the late 90s, because you saw a lot of them shift to being like the father of the young, whoever, like an American Pie or an Orange County. You saw stuff like that. They kind of shifted. And then you had, what Chevy Chase went through with the Chevy Chase show. There was just a lot of people trying to figure out how to stay relevant during that time.
And I think that makes sense in the scope of a career. I think, why wouldn't Chevy Chase want to go on and do his own talk show? He had already done a ton of movies at that point. I think any artist is going to constantly be looking for new places to go. Even in making this film, one of the standout interviews in the documentary is by Don Lake. And his interview is the one interview that I can just watch from start to finish. But he was even sharing that my dad, wanted to go into doing late night TV at some point. And I always thought that was such a cool observation where he was like, and Don, later had a career on the Bonnie Hunt show doing that exact work. And so, when you think of the potentials of what could happen and such, that's always interesting in the scope of my dad's career or other entertainers' careers.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought him up because he worked with your dad on Hostage for a Day, which your dad directed.
Yeah.
And what I've always heard about Hostage for a Day, I actually, your sister interviewed George Wendt when she was doing Couch Candy, which was a great
Yeah,
series of where she kind of did interview pieces based on people who work with your dad.
yeah.
And he seemed to suggest that that movie had been set up for your dad to star in, and then like the budget fell through. They wanted to do it on TV, and your dad was like, maybe I'll just direct it instead. Is that kind of how you remember that coming together?
Yeah, I actually saw your video on Hostage for a Day, because it might be the only video out there on
Yeah.
Hostage for a Day. Um, and I don't really know the answers to those questions. I bet I could dig in and find them. Um, but um, but that could be true. That does seem to be correct. Like just based off the trajectory at which projects came to my dad, I do know that his assistant and kind of person he worked with quite frequently was Robert Crane, Bob Crane,
Hmm.
and so that's how that project really got started. Bob and his late wife Kari, they wrote that together, and so and I think that you could also look at that potentially as it was my dad seeing a good idea and wanting to get it on its feet, and the way at which it presented itself was a TV movie of the week offer. Bob or whomever was kind of spearheading that was always planning on my dad to be the lead in it. But I liked your observations on that because I felt that that could be very true.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to see your dad really try some new things towards the end of his life, and
Yeah,
from being behind the scenes involved. And obviously, I have so many questions. I don't want to kind of dig into the stuff that's really present in a documentary because I want people to experience it. But there are some things in the documentary that to me were like to learn. I was almost floored. And one of the things that you kind of addressed in the documentary, like I had always known that your dad and John Hughes were closer than they're presented to be on whenever you read
right.
about them. I had no idea you guys were taking family vacations together.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That was very true. I mean, I think that the uh, the friendship that our families still have to this day is very strong. Um, you know, when my dad started working with Hughes, I think it was totally out of love and respect for creativity and collaboration. But they also got along. Like they grew up in the same part of the world. John had grown up in Detroit, and my dad was, from Toronto, and so it's kind of that shared experience of being
Same
from that
age
part.
too, I believe, right? They were the exact same age
Yeah,
or right around.
exactly. Yeah, he was. I think Hughes was maybe a year younger, um, but John was a big deal to me after my dad passed away because he really connected a lot of dots after my dad passed away when I was trying to really get to know who he was. John was the one who was still inviting us up to his family farm, or including us in Fourth of July events or whatever it was, and inviting us to family weddings. So he was that, kind of caretaker in that sense and in those moments you'd get these nights with John where he was so excited to talk to you, and then he would just go into all of these in-depth stories about my dad or Hollywood or the career or his hot takes and those were just the best. Those were just his observations on things, and they were very human.
Yeah. Do you think he would have come back to making films had he not unfortunately passed?
He was, I think, always toying with the idea, but I don't know if he would have. I don't have the answer to that. I think that he loved creativity, and I might have shared it in Philadelphia that night. But those little business cards, did I share that evening?
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, he would, to your listeners, like he would find new ways to be creative, and so like one of them was to create a pen pal relationship with a graphic designer from Oregon, and reach out to him, talk to him, and then say, hey, would you develop a business card for Del Griffith? And the graphic designer would then go ahead and do that. um, and then he would take those said business cards and he would go around Chicago or wherever he was living at the time, and post them up in pizzerias and coffee shops, and it was kind of like his. And what John very much was he loved his sons, John and James, very much loved his wife. They were being creative at the time, so John would then help out with their endeavors. be it specifically James. He wrote a short story in one of James's books, The Broken Wrist Project. The cool thing about Hughes is he kind of would show up in these places that you least expect, and I always thought that that was very clever and creative and cool for a director of his caliber to be doing creativity so subtly.
Yeah, and you always hear, I've heard like Matthew Broderick when they did that Oscars tribute, and a lot of people remark on John Hughes had like this dark, just like really funny sense of humor. And I have combed through hours of footage of the man for my videos. I'm actually working on a Baby's Day Out retrospective right now.
Oh, wow.
Where I interviewed Brian Haley, who was one of the actors. Like it's a really big, comprehensive piece on that movie. And it's just every interview you find with him, he's so dry and he's so matter of fact. But in the documentary, in the clips you show of him, the home movie clips, I'm like, that's the guy they always talk about. You see this kind of twisted, almost like funny guy goofing off. And it's kind of really shocking to see because it's not the John Hughes the public saw.
I think that for anyone who's trying to understand John Hughes, the best way to look at his body of work, he wrote for the National Lampoon, but then he created almost Norman Rockwell level cinema. Like it just got a sense of what America was like in those moments. And so, but he also had this sense of humor that the National Lampoon elevated. He was, but that's also like, I don't know if you have friends that are in advertising or if you have friends that work in that world. He was that type of person who was always pitching jokes, coming up with funny ideas, observing, but he was also, one of the things that John would do would be, he would, in his later years in life, would just obsess and deep dive into music. And he would want to know everything there is about country or opera or reggae. And he just loved the stories within that. Like, I can't speak enough about the guy and how just impressed I was and grateful that I was to know him. His curiosity and his like level of wanting to learn things is unlike anything I've ever seen. And I just think if the world could have some of that, they would learn a lot. That he was very open to learning.
Yeah, well, I think for me, it's like a selfish thing. It's the same thing with your dad's work, where it's like I want there to be more. Like I'm mad that we didn't get more. And what you've done in the documentary is you've kind of lifted that curtain a bit because you're showing. Obviously, a big part of my channel is talking about these deleted scenes from John Hughes, John Candy movies, and some pop up in the documentary. I don't want to give too much away, but what a joy to see. And these aren't the ones that have been on the Blu-ray. Like, these were scenes I have never seen or found. And it seemed like John and your dad saved a lot of that stuff just because it meant a lot to them.
John absolutely did. And my dad, we have a lot of those photos are from my mom's collection and photos that she took. But really, when it came to this is a great kind of way to look at it. When the Steve Martin documentary came out, that scene was talked about in regards to the extended Del Griffith monologue scene. And that was such a moment kind of within social media where I was like, I have access to ask John's son, John, if they have that, because he had accumulated so much stuff and footage. So with Hughes, I was able to go to John's son, whose also name is John, and he was able to find it, But the thing is it's when you're making a documentary, it's all about fit and where it's going to go. And for example, that scene which we found, to put it all in the movie wouldn't have made sense. It would have been like, here, let's watch the John Candy documentary, and then, just so you know, this was the scene that Steve Martin was talking about. It wouldn't have worked. Hopefully one day it maybe could come out, but it's like when you watch that scene, you also realize why it's not in the movie. It's just a little bit too long. It plays kind of like it's its own film. You just realize why the movie was edited the way it was edited.
The thing I was going to ask you about is, John always seemed to talk, John Hughes, about, oh wait, we shot more film than is possible in a film. We shot all these miles of film, and then you kind of, when you start to see this footage, you realize it wasn't like 3 hours of a fine-tuned film. It was these extended improv scenes where he was just encouraging your dad to go, and they were coming up with ideas right there on the set.
I like the kid. You know, that if it weren't for our shower curtain rings, Janet Leigh never would have caught her lunch in Psycho. It's a terrible thing to say, isn't it?
It had to be impossible for him to sit in that editing room and then try to figure out what to include. Much like with the documentary, I'm sure you're trying to figure out what's too much, what don't you want to include.
Yeah, with Planes, Trains, I think there was like 9 or 10 edits. And my mom will share the story where there would be a version that was all Del Griffith focused. There was a version that was all Steve Martin focused. And he would actually call my mom into a screening and say, well, what do you think of this edit? He was testing things. He was trying things. And I think he was constantly striving for that right balance in a film. So I think to your point, like since Hughes is gone, my father's gone, we don't get to see new, but there is a lot of material out there. So I think what a lot of people have to realize with Hughes and my family were private, but Hughes was private for a reason, and like I think he really respected his process, and he knew what he didn't include wasn't right for the film. He just had tested all of that stuff. But I think as fans of his work, we kind of want to know, well, what is that lost scene from Planes, Trains? I think within I Like Me, we get to share a little bit of that. But yeah, there in Deadpool fashion, there is an end credit sequence. I'll just put it that way.
I will encourage everyone to remain through the full end credits of the movie because there's a very nice surprise at the end. But when you're going through that footage, because it's not only the deleted scenes, you're going through the home movie footage and the interviews, some of these interviews that haven't been seen, is there a reluctance to share that part of your dad with us? Because it's like, he already gave us so much through the movies, and now the side of him that you knew, because I've been following his work my whole life, and watching the documentary, I see a side of him I have never seen before.
The answer is I'm so glad we got to. I think one of the things that I've experienced through this whole process is really understanding loss. I've lived with my father for a majority of my life, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about him, talking about him, and we get to share a part of him that he maybe had a hard time sharing, but we know to be true. So the anxiety and the things he grappled with, his existence, his family, in the same breath that how his movies helped people feel good from a comedic standpoint or a heartwarming standpoint, maybe at the very least it could help a person who's middle-aged go, I could use some therapy, or I need to open up to my partner more, or maybe at the very least that can help with that. But also if it doesn't, that's okay. But I think that I know one thing about my dad. With all of his things he went through, he was curious and always looking for solutions and ways to help get through things. Towards the end of his life, he was just so crippled with anxiety that it was like, well, what is this? Clearly I have everything. I have all the things you would want in life, and I still have got these things I grapple with. So I think if the movie can help explain that, it's important. And, I was upset with some of the interviews when I saw them and frustrated, but different times. We're in a different era now. We're progressing in many ways, even though it doesn't seem like it. But I feel like when you watch this movie, you'll understand what I'm talking about and experience that. It does a very good job at doing that.
When you say the interviews, you mean like some of those press junket footage where he's kind of being pushed about issues and...
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. I've also had people come and talk to me and say, well, I'm going to watch the Stripes scene differently now. I'm not, I don't look at that the same way. That's the mud wrestling scene. Or for me, even watching Great Outdoors and really seeing how he took all of these roles where he was this perfect father, but then through the documentary, you'll realize, well, that probably had a deeper reasoning in his selection of character. So
The interesting thing, too, coming back to John Hughes, is that, and the documentary touches on it, how the original ending of Vacation was much like John Hughes's short story in National Lampoon that ended with Clark Griswold driving to Roy Wally's house and taking him hostage there. That test screenings didn't go well. They had to write the new ending. That's when your dad comes in to do that security guard scene. Is that where and how him and John Hughes first meet? Or were they aware of each other? Do you know?
They were aware of each other. And he was obsessed with SCTV. I know that because I know that they really loved, like, the Schmenke brothers is actually a big connective tissue between Hughes and my father, because they, like I said, they grew up in the same region. And John would always say that I knew what it was he was talking about, because I would watch Sunday morning television and they would have these polka concerts playing, they had, and my father told John, like, they created characters that were human, and I think Eugene actually said this, though, but they would create characters that weren't the sharpest pencils in the drawer, and that was just a shared respect. So SCTV really is it, but it started there, and then I'm just trying to think, like, he just loved the guy. And it was, I think, because, in the 80s in Hollywood, there were a lot of personalities and egos to deal with. And the two of them were on the same playing field when it came to, like, their respect and what they valued. And they both had families. And so
I'm glad the documentary touched on that, because I found that John Hughes, a lot of people, think, oh, Molly Ringwald was his muse. And Macaulay Culkin says it in the documentary. Like, she did as many John Hughes movies as I did. Whereas your dad, I think if you lump everything together, including the cameos and the guest appearances, it's like 8 movies.
Yeah, I think Macaulay says 9, but I think, it might be 7 or 8 actually. But yeah, they worked the most together, and I think that just speaks to the respect that they had for each other, I mean, it's more than just respect, like, and I wish John were here to really go into it. He loved my father. But Steve Martin said it he says it in the documentary. It's not spoiling anything. When Steve Martin, and I was at that interview when he said it, and it stood out to me. He said, to get someone of John Hughes's caliber to write a movie for you, wow. The Uncle Buck is like, first of all, that doesn't really happen anymore. Maybe The Rock and the Smashing Machine. I don't know. But you just don't really see that as often. And so, and honestly, Joe, like, I miss that era of filmmaking, and I miss those kind of character-driven movies, and they're out there still in the world for sure. But when you go back and watch this documentary and revisit that stuff, it is really makes you appreciate what we had when we were watching it.
That's one of my specialties.
And, the documentary also touches on, which I'd heard before, your dad's a big fan of Laurel and Hardy, and there's a great photo of him playing drums with a W.C. Fields poster behind him, and there's some talk of Jackie Gleason. Did his love of the old comedies get passed to you?
Sure. I always grew up with him. Well, he loved, I remember watching a Mad World with him. And I remember Three Stooges, we'd watch Three Stooges.
He did a great Curly on a few SCTV.
When I'm good and ready. Oh, when you're good and ready? Yeah. Well, that's different. Oh, you ready? I'm ready. Go on and get up.
Well, your side note, too. Did you know that Hughes wrote the beginning draft of Dumb and Dumber? Did you know that?
I heard that his stipulation with it was that he sold it to the Farrelly brothers with the stipulation, I don't want to be credited at all. Do what you want with it. I just don't want to be. Is that true?
Did you know that? I don't know if that's true, but what I'm getting at is that Harry and Lloyd are based off of Laurel and Hardy.
And their names, I believe, come from Harold Lloyd, the great silent clown.
Right. Yes. Yeah. The reason I bring that up is there are all of these nods within that generation to that era of comedy. I think I remember watching like, well, yeah, no, I remember all the Three Stooges stuff and Groucho Marx. I remember watching those films with him. And it wasn't really till I got older. I took a class in Billy Wilder in college, and I started, and John was still alive at that time, and so I really got to pick Hughes's brain about like those types of movies and the use of comedy and storytelling but that's where I really like began to really appreciate the kind of older comedy, and then it wasn't, and then also like you can't not be around a lot of these amazing comedians and just hear how they were so influenced by Lenny Bruce. Like I was friends with Richard Lewis, who's a dear friend of mine, huge Lenny Bruce fan. It's like these guys were influenced by those early comedies, and it shows up in their work. And the only reason I bring up all of those names is just to point out like that was the era that they grew up in. I grew up in watching Mr. Show and Conan O'Brien and Kids in the Hall, and they're all connected back to SCTV. SCTV is all connected back to that era of comedy. It's this the connective tissue of comedy and the pantheon of it.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, the biggest laughs I think in the screening were the SCTV clips. I think people are, because I think that show is so not hidden. You can find it, but it's people have kind of forgotten just how surreal and just dark the humor was, and to see you guys pick some really dark sketches to show, and I think it's Conan that touches on it. Your dad, how he could shift into like maniacal real quick.
Yeah.
But the laughter in the theater was so loud that you were kind of missing the next interview pieces. So that's why I'm saying I really recommend people go see it, because it was kind of like this greatest hits collection, like a tribute band almost playing.
Yeah. I think like that I was really appreciative of all of that. And I've said it before in interviews and you're picking up on it, like, but this is the last kind of John Candy movie, and it, as it should be. I feel like a lot of his last films kind of came and went in the middle of the night. It's like, part of me even wants to go rewatch Wagons East, because I just am curious to see what they were working on. And I haven't really gone and looked under the hood on that one, but Canadian Bacon I found to be funnier out of the box when I was younger. That's, pretty funny movie at times. And so, but when I was younger, they kind of came and went, and this will allow all of his fans to at least watch this and feel like this sense of goodbye, and appreciation for the work that he did, and learn some new things along the way.
Was there a closure element for your family as well?
Sure. We've been working on this for 6 years. And there were a lot of other documentaries that were starting to get underway and be made. And this was an opportunity for us to do a definitive documentary with the help of some really talented creative people. I mean, Colin Hanks directed the hell out of this thing. Ryan's love is just all through the DNA of it all. But it was a team of amazing people. I mean, this room that I'm sitting in here is where people were just digitizing photos and coming over and putting the movie together. So to see everything digitized, to see everything on a hard drive, and then to see it out there in the world and people react to it feels really great, and so there is that element. We're always going to miss him. People would ask me of his era, well, is the movie sad? And I said, yeah, it's sad. You haven't seen this guy for 31 years. You're going to hear his voice. You're going to see him moving around. You're going to miss him. That part is sad, And I think if anything, I've just been feeling the breath of time, and how much time has gone by. And as I'm talking to his friends or whatnot, be it Marty Short or Dave Thomas or Catherine O'Hara, I'm realizing, time has gone on. Talk to my mom, time's gone on. So.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the documentary how, because I heard you talk about that you got emotional when you started to digitize some of those old family tapes and family stuff. And So, like, when you're processing that loss earlier in your life, are you able to watch the movies but not the home stuff? Was there a separation between those?
Yeah, I think it was just, it's kind of how the cards lied. It's like eventually I would start watching the movies, and then I would always know that there was this box of home footage. But when are you gonna really digitize that? It wasn't until this film actualized that there was a desire and a need for it that I was all in. And I went, it's funny, I made a short documentary about this skate shop that I work with in Santa Monica called Kinda Crazy. And the only reason I bring that up is this skate shop was my first job when I was in the 8th grade. you know, Old school skate shop, been there forever. And then it was also the first documentary I produced. And I was very hands-on in digitizing footage and finding old stuff. So in the way that the skate shop was my first job for professional life, the documentary was my first attempt at making a documentary. So it geared me up to go into I Like Me. So I went after it the same way I went after the skate shop. Oh, I got to find all this footage, got to do all that. The difference from this Kinda Crazy and I Like Me was I was immediately like crying because I was seeing, a 6-year-old me, and my dad was alive again, and my old house that we used to live in. And so that part was just a tsunami of feelings and emotions but I say all of that, and it was all heavy and difficult to work through it. But I really mean it when I say I'm really happy I got to do it with my mom, with my sister. We did a lot of it very hands-on, just to get that across, to get the digitizing part of this correct. Like, we were in my mom's kitchen with a projector looking at home footage before we sent it off to get properly digitized. We pre-digitized everything with an Amazon, little Wolverine digitize. Like, the love for filmmaking was alive and well while we were doing it. So
it's really nice to see your mom in this, because she is someone who's, it seemed, avoided the public eye for a long time. Was there reluctance on you to let her be a part of this, or was there hesitation on her part to kind of put this story out there?
No, we had no problem with the information going out there. I think for her it was just, it's respecting everyone's privacy, and I think we live in a world now where people have no problem sharing themselves or being out there in the world, be it on social media or YouTube channels or movies. But I also respect people who don't want anything to do with the public eye. Like, that's just not what they want to do. They don't have to. So for all these years, she just didn't want to. But that's also why Colin was the perfect director for this, because there was a familiarity with Colin and his dad, and not his mom, with Rita, his stepmother. But there was a familiarity there. So I knew in asking Colin to direct it, there would already be a built-in comfortableness in regards to the sensitivities handled around my mom specifically.
And did it give you comfort? Because, I mean, Colin himself is the son of a famous person. Did you find you two could relate better as a subject and a director?
Yeah, but he did a good job he did a very good job at keeping those things separate. And I respected that. We've talked about it now, but he really was the director, but I just knew it was kind of this unspoken, like, he got it. He understood the sensitivities and the privacy involved. But no, he didn't. It wasn't. This wasn't like a joyride. It was difficult for all of us, and he knew his job, and so he did it.
The good thing about the documentary, too, is it's got to be challenging to figure out which film roles of your dad's to showcase. And, I mean, there are so many clips in this thing. I mean, even stuff like The Silent Partner, and I mean, just those roles that so many people forget he was in. But then there's kind of, towards, you get to the late 80s, early 90s, there's some projects thrown in there that there's kind of an area of the documentary about, like, when he was doing a lot of favors for people and taking on roles for that. But one of the things that kind of gets glanced over, and I just don't think there was probably enough room to talk about it, is Camp Candy, which you were involved in.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because like it's tough when you're putting together a movie. Maybe if this was a 2-part series, you could go into more detail on how things connected historically. Um, the Camp Candy part, Radio Candy 2, gets kind of thrown into the what I like to refer to as like the manic era of his life.
Yeah.
And a lot of celebrities have it. You know, they just say yes to everything and they take on a lot. But to be able to talk about it here, he really loved to be able to do Camp Candy. You know, even though he was squeezing it in to every aspect of his life, he really loved doing Camp Candy. And I think that that was a opportunity for him to include us, do something for his kids. You know, it was like, um, I think all of his fans and people who like are watching or listening to our show today is like, he loved everything he did. There was no kind of like shoehorning it in, you know, even the films that people don't like, he loved them. You know, like Who's Harry Crumb is like a panned film, you know, but that's like talking about history and comedy. Like that's his attempt to do a Peter Sellers. That's his attempt to do a Pink
Yeah.
Panther. And I think a lot of comedians want to have that opportunity. They like the bumbling detective. We still see it today. So
Yeah.
it's like you know, Bill Murray did a movie in the '90s. I remember about a bumbling detective.
And your dad produced Who's Harry Crumb, which
Yeah.
was a big deal for him. He hadn't
Yes.
at that point been that directly involved in the film.
Exactly.
So he's wearing that critical reception and failure probably a bit more on his shoulders than other films.
Totally. But with that being said, like you look back on them now and it's like there's a lot of funny parts in all of those movies. I mean, I have a friend who's like championing for a Nothing But Trouble reboot, you know, which I doubt would ever happen. But when you look at Nothing But Trouble, it's so like ahead of its time. I loved your Nothing But Trouble movie because like you do this good job on your channel, just to compliment you on giving people the opportunity, like the wherewithal to understand, like that was Dan Aykroyd's first time at directing. This was John Candy's first time at directing. These are wild, undeniably creative people. What would have happened if they got a second shot? What would have happened if they were given a little bit more opportunity, or you know, what would have that have looked like? And that I've always been curious about that. I don't know what that would have been.
Who's Harry Crumb? And your dad's 1989 is insane because he had Uncle Buck, Who's Harry Crumb, and then Speed Zone as well, which is like one of those movies is the biggest hit of the year pretty much, and then the other two are one doesn't do well, and Speed Zone like just at least in the U.S. completely flew under the radar.
Whoa. Now that is weird. That's very weird because I always thought that you didn't like me. How about that? I don't. You don't? No.
That's what when I was going, and you even can do that with JFK. You can do that with a lot of movies if you look at the years at which he was making those movies. Like, I think that there's this narrative of like, oh, with JFK, he would have gone on to do more dramatic work. Yeah, he would have, absolutely. But like, because I was trying to do it with this when I was giving notes, I'm like, well, how does he go to do this, then to do that? But then he also like, he just was in this place of yes. And I think he was beginning to get to this place of like, well, what should I be doing? You know, and because he inevitably passes away on Wagons East, you know, I just think when you really like, you can overanalyze it, but what he was really looking to do is just try to do things, give himself to comedy, give himself to these projects, make some, you know, money along the way. With Camp Candy, Radio Candy, the ones that he was personally driving, I think he felt more connected to. And, you know, we filmed some of those segments at our family farm that are like the
with live action, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the live action sequences. You know, and what can sum him up is like the documentary's thesis is he gave to everyone first before he took care of everyone else first but himself. Like he was kind of last in line. And you see that with all of his productions where he's including his friends, he's including his family. he's giving, and I wish he would have had that, someone get fully through to him and say, like, you could take a couple years off, man, and you'll be okay. Everyone's gonna still remember you, and you'll be good. But that's not what happened.
I know it's commonly talked about that he, passed on Louis Tully in Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
And he had kind of a different idea of who that character should be. It wasn't melding with Ivan Reitman's. That's what I was always told. Do you think then seeing what that movie became caused him to have some regret in turning things down and later motivated him to say yes to things, or it wasn't that deep?
I don't think so, actually. No, I think he just knew that wasn't probably gelling the right way, and that was probably all it was. I think back to like the transition of comedy, I think what we were talking about earlier, like I think comedies were just changing. I just think like what the audiences were looking for was going to be needing to be more real or more absurd, and you see that like all of those SCTV actors went on to go do Christopher Guest movies, and those are like really familiar, relatable comedies to anyone watching because they get so silly and everyone can go, oh my God, I know a person like that.
Yeah.
And that's why Planes, Trains is such a strong movie, because it has the feel of this big blockbuster comedy, but the relatability of a SCTV sketch or a Christopher Guest movie. Everyone's been in a situation where they've been next to a Del Griffith or a Neil Page.
Nothing grinds my gears worse than some chowderhead who doesn't know when to keep his big trap shut.
So I was wondering if I could ask you about, your dad gets lumped in with some film roles that he was circling or that he turned down, but there's a few that I believe are just kind of like those film urban legends.
Yeah.
And one of those is like you see him attached to this stuff like a Fatty Arbuckle biopic or this Confederacy of Dunces project. I think it happens to be associated with them because Belushi was involved and then maybe Chris Farley. Was there anything in those projects that he might have at one point been?
I don't think Fatty Arbuckle. I do think Confederacy of Dunces, though. I think there was curiosity there. And that's only, but take that with a grain of salt. I heard that from this one producer who's now passed away. There was a lot of stuff on the, I think that was thrown his way, but I think like when you go to like think of things like that, who knows if they even would have gotten made.
Right.
And there were so many things coming his way at that point. But I do know, like I might have shared it in Philadelphia, but ones like that are kind of just fun to think of, but like Pulp Fiction, he got sent the script on Pulp Fiction, which would have been bizarre. And then the one that his driver told me about was that he was up to be in Goodfellas and he screen tested for it. And,
wow.
And I have the photo somewhere. I'd grab it right now if I could find it. But
oh my gosh.
Yeah, but there's like footage of him looking like a tough kind of gangster guy,
Wow.
So those are shockers for me when I was going through it, going like, whoa, that would have been a completely different John Candy.
The other thing I heard that they were doing some tests on was they were dabbling with him voicing a turkey in Pocahontas.
Yeah, that's true.
Called Red Feather, I think. Yeah. And that was like right after Jeffrey Katzenberg at Disney had done the Robin Williams Aladdin thing. So I feel like they were trying to kind of every of their animated movies we're going to have like let's do a character that's got this big comedy personality.
Well, that's also that's funny you say that because that tracks because didn't in the Goofy movie documentary they talk about Katzenberg wanting to get Steve Martin to voice Goofy. Did you?
Yes. Yeah.
So that maybe was like what Katzenberg thought would be the move for all the characters. They kind of did that though for a while. I feel like Timon and Pumbaa and all those things. Yeah. Who knows? But he was in that in that stream of people who they were going to do and elevate characters and stuff.
Would there have been a role, like let's say they're making a Jackie Gleason biopic, would there have been a role like that where your dad was like, oh, I have to play this person? Was there someone in his life that he admired enough to really want to do that?
That's a great question. Like nothing, No, I can't think of anyone from like a comedic world, but I do know he loved this television show called Coronation Street, which is a British or a British kind of TV show, and I'm sure he would have like loved to have been a guest on that. You know, I'm like and then when I heard from Don Lake that he wanted to have a talk show, that really like put a smile on my face because I was like, that would have been so good.
Who did he like as like contemporary comics and movie stars? Like who was he taking the movies you to go see as a kid? What were you taking him to, insisting to go see?
Well, okay, that's a great question too.
Chris, I tell you, I've got like 25 years of questions that are just that are in the head that have been trying to get out. So take your time.
I know. He was good at taking me to movies that I wanted to see as a kid. Like he took me to a screening of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which blew my mind. And then I remember I took him to see Back to the Future 3.
Wow.
One of the movies I'm glad I got to see with him is Jurassic Park, because that was like it still is my nerdy favorite movie of all time. And the fact that I could say that I saw that with him in a movie theater in Hawaii of all places.
Wow. Where most of that was filmed, I believe, right? Near Hawaii.
Yeah, just like from a personal standpoint, that brings a tear to my eye. But one that I always stands out for me that I know he loved was he loved Albert Brooks, and he loved Defending Your Life. And
wow.
I remember watching that movie with him, and I remember that movie struck a chord with him. And so I've always been into the dry humor of Albert Brooks, specifically that movie. So he was, impressed by that stuff. He loved John Hughes' stuff. He was always rooting for those movies. But a funny thing that you say this is like a little known fact, but like before he passed away, he told my mom that he was a big fan of Fred McMurray. And he just said, I love Fred McMurray. And after he passed away, my mom was looking for places for him to rest. And she found this mausoleum in Los Angeles. And she looked above and saw a spot, and below it was Fred McMurray. So he's buried right above Fred McMurray.
He got top billing in the end.
Yes, he did. He did.
I've heard you talk about there seems to be, and maybe it's just a way to deal with grief and loss as we tend to do this, but looking for signs in the world from that person. And you told I heard you tell a story about when you were trying to decide on a title for the documentary.
Yeah.
You had kind of a moment that was such a cool moment you had.
Yeah, well, I think there's always these kind of messages that kind of come out from the world if you're listening. And sometimes they just show up for you. The two parts to it. When the documentary started getting filmed, the first title of the movie was I Like Me, was being tossed around, and everyone really loved it. And it was the first thing that had been created about the documentary, and I was unsure. I want to make sure people have taken me out of context saying I hate the title or I hated the title. I love the title. But at the time I wasn't sure if that was the right fit, because I knew we were about to go on a journey of exploring him. And there's a lot of parts of him that would come across that he didn't like himself. He certainly only lived to be 43. But that was in the very beginning. First day of production, we were driving down a freeway in Toronto, and there was a picture car from Vacation being towed on the back of a tow truck. And I looked at it and I was like, this isn't what? And just so I wasn't confused, the license plate said Griswold. And
it's amazing.
So amazing, but that's where I'm kind of going like, I've got to be on some kind of correct path. And as we were making the movie and all of these things, I Like Me started making more sense, but it wasn't until the very end I realized, oh, John Hughes titled the movie. he came up with it. He wrote that unbelievably beautiful monologue, and why? Of course, this is the title. Because I also know that my dad did like himself, and he did have a lot of love for himself. He was on a journey to figuring a lot of that out, but I know I love him and I miss him, and I'm just very fortunate that that's the person I get to call my dad, and that I get to meet all of these really talented, amazing people along the way.
Well, it's also really special again because like you bring a perspective that we don't typically get when talking about people like your dad, and especially again because like you're not just knowing him, you're knowing all these people that surrounded him, and you're seeing how they worked. And like to come back to John Hughes, it seemed like him and your dad, there was such a trust in their work and a willingness to try things, because I've noticed in Uncle Buck, when there's the scene when Buck's brother first calls him,
Right.
as written, Shanice is in bed with him, and you
Right.
can even see in the film behind his shoulder, like she's moving
Right.
around. And then obviously that's not in the movie. What we get is that amazing scene of him calling her, and so it seems to me like one of them, either John Hughes or your dad, threw that suggestion out there, and they were like, "Oh, we'll do that as another take, and it worked so much better."
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Philadelphia. Were you there when I shared the story about how Planes, Trains was so over budget and over time? And
Yeah.
the studio sent camera crews. Honestly, I have a feeling that some of the footage you're going to see in the documentary is like Paramount legal team footage, making sure that they're actually making the movie. There's some behind
Wow.
the scenes, because that was where the footage came from. But yeah, to share with your listeners, like there is this story I actually heard at John Hughes's funeral, where someone who worked on the movie came up and said the movie was so behind schedule, and the studio sent a legal team and producers and suits down to set to make sure that they were on pace to finish the film. And they get to set first day, and what do they find but John Candy in a giant devil's costume poking people in the butt with his little Triton. And they were like, this is not in the movie anywhere. Where is this in the script? And that was because that was just a quick idea. But that little moment elevates that scene so much,
Yeah.
Um,
It's also like as like a comedy perspective, everything in your brain would tell you, no, you know what? We're doing the gag with the skeletons. It's a cut to the devil. It's too much. It shouldn't work. But it's just the way they both sell that imagery that you're like, no, this totally works. Like let's yeah. And then on top of that, you get the fingers and I mean, just that Planes, Trains hits a speed at a certain way in that movie, then just takes off to the end. There's no breathing room, and it works. But that's why I think when you get to see your dad's improv on the plane, I mean, we're like 20 minutes long of just him talking about Hitchcock and the birds, and it really adds context to Neil Page's outburst.
Da-dum, da-da-da-dum, da-dum. Did you see Birds?
It's amazing how without that, the performances make it work just as well.
Yeah, I think that Steve says it best, like John knew how to play annoying so well. I just had to be bothered. It was a master class. We've all been there. It's funny because I often feel like the Neil, but I'll be sitting next to Adele. It's like someone who just wants to talk the whole flight, and but I laugh in those moments now too, because it's just like, oh man, this is like,
that would be like you getting sat next to me and I just want to keep talking about John Candy the whole time next to you.
Similar story about that movie.
No, it's totally loved, man. Like I really appreciate it, but I think I've always just also appreciated your point of view on comedy and movies. So
well, thank you. It's a very full circle moment for me, because Yeah, it's just I love talking about your dad and sharing his work and connecting with his fans around the world because it's never went away, as you know.
Well, it's caught in the ear of like, I think Steve Martin retweeted your work once, and I think I know I've shared your, I think the Planes Trains one with the Hugheses, so like people have seen it.
I'm floored to hear that. Thank you. It's
And they said
I
he's got some stuff right, but I have to say they're very nice people, and but I also totally respect their privacy with that stuff. But they definitely have a lot. But that was just to go back to John, and I know I'm not talking out of turn. Like he just saw so much, and like he was so intelligent and interacted with so much in the industry that like but he I will say that John was as nuanced and did as much of a deep dive as you're picking up on in his stuff, for sure. He just the way he created.
Yeah, and I'm fascinated by just the level of power he got to, because in this Baby's Day Out video, discovering that he repurposed this tennis club in Chicago to be his soundstage and his studios, and it was just like he really seemed like he wanted to operate as far away from Hollywood as possible.
Yeah, there was very much that, and I think the film that he had a hard time with my dad passing away, and then I think I know he had a bit of a hard time with Miracle on 34th Street and how the studios handle that rollout. But you look back at that movie, and that's a great remake of a Christmas classic. Like, we're making movies at the end of the day. Like, they're not going to change the world, but he knew how to make a beautiful thing. And I think a lot of people are so quick at the very beginning to say if something's good or bad. Ryan Reynolds actually said it really well. It's like people are so afraid to fail. And a lot of people don't realize, like, when you're making a movie, there's a lot of stuff that'll work and a lot of stuff that won't work. But over the test of time, you'll come back and go, you know what? That Miracle on 34th remake was great. Like,
yeah, and you get John Hammond himself as Santa Claus. It's great casting.
But even with, I loved your observation on Hostage for a Day and the Fargo connection. I thought that was so funny.
It's eerily similar considering the times that they came out. And now I hear your dad's auditioning for Goodfellas. I don't know. Maybe there was he seemed to be getting on the right people's radars there. The other thing, watching your dad's movies, is he seemed to like to play with hair a lot. And I know he worked but Ben Nye, he had a pretty long-term makeup guy. Was that his doing? Did he like just experimenting with characters' hair, or was that something that was coming from the production angle?
No, that was him for sure. And I think, well, you just like, I always say it this way, and I think it's the best way to look at my dad's creative mind. He was the happiest and the most energized, I think, during SCTV and Second City, and there you had Jewel Hallmeyer, who is the wardrobe designer, and that I think imprinted on him at a very early age on how he liked to make characters. So wardrobe and hair and makeup all played a major role in all of that stuff in explaining a character. It's almost like a Groundlings level approach to character, but it's a very SCTV approach too. Of having a character who looks and comes across a certain way.
Yeah, and you see a lot of, like, I've heard Rick Moranis speak on this, how, when they would write sketches for SCTV, it was essentially, it would fall to the writers or performers of that sketch to direct it. So it seemed like there was hands-on so many different aspects of that show.
Yeah, and that transcended into the movies. And I think that's like, it's like what everyone is bringing to the table, and it's on the director then, I think, to really help shape and guide all of that stuff. That's why, like, when I was looking back at his catalog of work, like I said, I wear these big rose-colored glasses for all of his movies, but I could go, even if it's lame to look at, but if you look at the Rotten Tomatoes, it's like, oh, when he has an amazing director behind him, audiences really resonate with it. But then when there isn't maybe the best director, or it's a newer director, it doesn't do as well. But when you do go back and then look at those movies, there's a lot of funny comedy that's being told and attempted, and so with that, it's like, yeah, it's a part of his catalog of his quiver of characters and
And
creativity.
you never for a second, I mean, even in Nothing But Trouble or things where your dad might have been doing a favor, you never pick up on that. He always seemed to handle every single film role with the same sincerity and conviction
Yeah.
as the last. And I think as kids, we pick up on that when we're watching a movie as kids.
I think you're right. I think I was around for when they were filming Nothing But Trouble, and you look at that. It's like, look at Nothing But Trouble is a great example. Dan Aykroyd directed. Valerie Bromfield is the cop along with him. Valerie Bromfield and Dan Aykroyd are the reason he's in SCTV. They're doing
Right.
favors for each other. They're trying to be creative. Like, they're just like, it's like this postmodern SCTV sketch, and then but then there's a lot going on there. It's like, he's creating a new universe. You point out in the video, it's like he created Ghostbusters. He's creating Nothing But Trouble. One's about supernatural firefighters. This is about a bizarre sheriff in this backroads town. What could that world open up to be? Interesting question.
It's amazing to me to look at, and like we talked about Cabin Boy and things like that, but how you had these comedy filmmakers, comedy talent, make something really successful, and then the next project didn't hit quite the same level, and that's all it takes to be like, nope, you're done. And I think with John Hughes, that's what it was, where it was like everyone wanted that Home Alone level success, and it was never going to happen because they weren't Home Alone.
Yeah. But what I can say with all of those people is they go on to have really fulfilling, beautiful careers, be it if it's my father's, which ended early, it's through our family, and we get to continue to share his story and then have our own, forays into entertainment the way we want to. It's all part of the story, and it's all in the spirit of creativity. I grew up with a very creative mom and very creative dad, and for people like Hughes, it's in his kids and in his later years, even though he wasn't making movies, he was doing incredibly creative stuff, be it writing or cooking or gardening. It's like,
I heard he became really good friends with Vince Vaughn. The two of them kind of became friends and were
Yeah, Vince lived in his neighborhood in Illinois, and so they hung out quite a bit. And I don't think I'm talking out of turn here, but Vince would show John clips or cuts of his movies, and John Hughes would say, well, you need to go watch John Candy movies. This will help you get to what you're looking for. And Vince would always be like, yeah, he loved your dad. Like, I know.
What do you know about Bartholomew versus Neff?
Oh, not much. That was another movie they were going to do.
As far as I know, it was something. It was the third Hughes directed Candy starring film with Sylvester Stallone. I think was the plan. It just I've seen like trade advertisements for it in research. Like it was at I think in like '91. It looked like it was coming together, and then it didn't end up happening. I'm always curious as to why your dad and John Hughes loved each other so much, but yet they only worked as a director-actor directly twice.
Yeah, I think that they wanted to eventually get together and team up properly, and it just didn't happen. But they knew that the working relationship was very much there, and I know that. I remember that movie. Yeah, I think that was going to eventually happen after Wagons East. That was where they were neighbors, right?
I think so. It was going to be like a feuding neighbors type movie. Because I think John Hughes was an early investor in Planet Hollywood with Stallone, so there was a connection there too.
Right. I don't know if that for a fact, but I hear it here first on Hats Off Entertainment.
Yeah, it might be my scoop.
But that all tracks, like, it makes sense. I think that there were a lot of projects that were kind of after the fact that they just fizzled out. Or then I heard that Bartholomew versus Neff eventually became neighbors. Isn't that true?
Oh, yeah, it could be. I know some
I don't
of
know
those.
if that's true or not. I just, the chain of title for these things, especially with
Yeah.
Hughes, it's like he writes, Made in Manhattan and Drillbit Taylor, and like you come
Well,
to find
actually, he didn't. That was Edmond Dante's. You need to.
yes, sorry,
It wasn't.
you're right. But
But
yeah,
yeah, I feel like these studios. It started with Beethoven.
Right.
They tried to get that and I think he was trying to do that one with your dad too. But he had left Universal. Home Alone came out, it was a huge hit, and Universal was like, "Oh, we're going to make this now and market it as from the
Right.
creator of Home Alone." And he was like, "No, you're not. I'm Edmond Dante's."
yeah, that was his clever way of getting around things and still working. I think he was punching up scripts. I think he was doing a lot of that work. What a lot of people have to understand, I think, with when you get to that level, is there is a lot of responsibility and there's a lot of legal stuff. There's all kinds of unseen forces that are being. It's not just as simple to go just make a thing. So I think John was always aware of that.
Yeah, and I think Uncle Buck for the two of them. I mean, the moment for me when I'm so glad it's addressed in the documentary. Macaulay Culkin talks about it, about how he treated kids on film, and
Right.
the moment in Uncle Buck that always endeared me to him started when I was a kid. It's the way he treats not Macaulay and Gabby. It's the kid outside the waiting room
Yeah.
and the principals. That to me feels like a real kid that they pulled out of class. It doesn't feel like an actor.
It is.
Is that true?
Yeah. That kid had never heard the dialogue, so they used the take of him hearing the dialogue for the very first time. So yeah,
It's genuine. You can tell, but it's just that little pat on the knee, and just like he talks to that kid like we wanted to be talked to as kids by adults.
that was his superpower. That was his gift. I think he knew, when we say it, he was a kid, a big kid at heart. I think he didn't ever lose sight of that. Hughes never lost sight of that. He very well knew the relationship of, I'm the adult, you're the kid. But I'm, like, it's kind of like, it's interesting as I get older too. It's like you understand that the importance of that line, and being like, oh yeah, well, this is what a kid wants to talk about, and kids are wildly open and creative. So it's like, if you just understand that and you're communicating with them, you're good.
And you have an improv. You studied UCB.
UCB, a little bit of Groundlings, and then Second City, and some teachers from IO. Yeah.
Do you find that that ability to think quick on your feet is genetic? Did it come from your dad? Does it require training?
It does, for sure. I think my family has a very good sense of. We all have a bit of Johnny Toronto in us, so we're all not afraid to say yes to things and go out. But I think where we really strive is when we're like confident in what we're doing, and informed and trained, and keep that educational brain open.
Do you see yourself maybe doing more behind the scenes stuff, directing, producing in the future?
Yeah, I've talked about it. I'm open to everything. I've trained to be an actor, and I'd love to keep getting more acting work. I have had a few projects come out. For TIFF alone, I had a small part in a Josh Gad movie.
Mm-hmm. And you work with Alex Winter as a director. Yeah, that had to be great.
That was awesome. So yeah, and I've been working as an actor for over 15 years and made my own stuff, and I've definitely put in a lot of time. But with that being said, I love acting and I love making music. But I've had opportunities come where I've gotten to be a director and produce, and so as I get older, the long way of answering your question is I'm open to everything. I don't really want to say no to anything, and I have a great network of friends to fall back on in regards to helping projects look great and feel great.
So if that Nothing But Trouble reboot comes down the pike, you're not turning it down?
I will not ever replay one of my father's characters, but I would help bring it to life and maybe play another weird giant baby. You'll never see me replaying one of his roles. I'll tell you that, though.
And that's probably as it should be. And I feel like
we all respect that in my family.
Yeah, and I love seeing what you and your sister have done. How you've kind of made these careers for yourselves. I remember your sister, I think, popping up in According to Jim at one point, and you've been in commercials. So it's always nice to see that you've both carved out nice careers and don't use your famous father as sort of a crutch to get work. It seems like you're really hardworking and you really do your best in roles.
Totally. Yeah. And it just doesn't work that way. Like, Jen and I have been really fortunate to get a lot of great meetings and meet with people. But, at the end of the day, and I think everyone has to understand this, like, because I had to understand this, you have to be really good in order for them to put you in a movie, or if it's another, it's just, and for us, it's like really important for that. Like, you have to really work. You have to show up for what you're doing. And so, when I get the opportunity, I want to make sure it's like the best I can bring to the table. And my dad was alive in a time where he was at many lightning in a bottle moments. Like, how often is it you get to be on an improv team with Catherine O'Hara, Martin Short, Eugene Levy, Gilda Radner? How, like, that's your first improv team? that's like Beatles level stuff. So
yeah, that generation, the documentary touches on it. They just conquered the world, and it's insane that it was this core group of friends for the most part that did it.
Totally. So for me, it's always been about finding my own voice and figuring out what is most authentic, but then to be all of that said, like we talked about earlier, this is the moment to go on stage with Ryan Reynolds and talk about my dad. This is the time to do it, and let's go all in and really celebrate it and make t-shirts and do the whole thing. It's like we've never done that as a family, and we're saying yes to it now, and it's because it feels like it's the right time to do it. And let's go for it. Let's have fun. Let's celebrate him.
I love that. And I'll leave you one quick story that I wanted to bring up. Maybe about like 10 years ago, I ended up at an event in Beverly Hills that Mel Brooks was at, and everyone was trying to get to him. And I finally, I got my 30 seconds. Let me just talk to him. And the only thing I could really think to do is ask about working with your dad. And he pretty much said what he says in the documentary. But then he said, and this might be a scoop, you can let me know. He said, "Oh, I see his son in Whole Foods all the time. We talk in Whole Foods." And I'm like, that's a sketch.
Okay,
is that
dude,
true?
That is... I was just thinking about that this morning. Yes, I saw him at a Whole Foods once. And what is so funny about that is, God, this is connective. Okay. The funny thing about that is I saw him once and I introduced myself and I just said, "I love your work. My father was John Candy. I don't want to bother you, but I just want to introduce myself." And he talked to me for a little bit, and he said, "Oh, wow, that's so sweet. So what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm an actor, and I do commercial work." And he's like, "Oh, I'll look out for you for sure. I'll look out for you." And as time's gone on, in between then and now, that interaction at Whole Foods introduced me to his son, Nicholas, via Twitter. And Nicholas Brooks wanted to get to know me via Twitter, so I started a relationship with Nicholas. When the documentary came up and it was super important to get Mel Brooks in it, it was my relationship with Nicholas that connected me to his father and his granddaughter that landed the interview.
Wow.
So that Whole Foods moment has been very helpful.
It was, I swear, he talked more about that experience than working with your dad. My question was about your dad, but he seemed more fond of the Whole Foods interaction. So you made an impact on the man. So be proud of that.
Well, when we interviewed him, it was a magical moment. And
Well, he's speaking for both him and Carl Reiner too.
Yeah, well, and they've always been adjacent to our group, our family. Like I've known people in Carl's family, and I've known people in Mel's family, and they are very good people, and they're very kind people, and caring people. So.
Yeah, and that's another film role where it's like I don't think your dad was the first choice. I think I've read they were trying to maybe do a more prosthetic kind of puppet or something, and when he got cast, they really figured out a way to make his face come through because it's such a big part of that character. And he's great. It's so expressive, but I encourage anyone to go seek out this documentary. If not on Amazon Prime, go see it in a packed out. Are you going to be present at the remaining events?
Yep, I'll be I'm going to go back on the road with it, and I'll be at LA this week. And yeah, I have to say though, Joe, it meant of all the people who I was curious to whether they'd like the documentary, I was the most curious about if you would have enjoyed it, because I know you spent so much time kind of studying his career, and this was a moment for us to give our efforts to his career out to the world. So when I saw that you enjoyed it, it really meant a lot.
Well, it seriously warms my heart, because as everyone knows, your dad's work shaped my career in a lot of ways, and I'm so thankful and grateful that you have chosen to share this side of him with the world, because in that review I said it, and I mean it. It really does feel like a John Candy movie, because you're not just getting the great scenes you all know and love. You're getting these deleted scenes that we've never seen before. You're getting interviews. You're getting the home movies. I mean, you're seeing a side of your dad that, and me, I've pretty much seen countless hours of interviews, hours of footage. It felt like I was seeing him as the person for the first time. So for that, I'm really grateful that you guys decided to share that, and congrats on the film. I hope it really does well and gets some great feedback from Amazon.
Oh yeah, it's already doing great. So yeah, I'm glad you got to see it, and yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
Good day to you, madam.